Good morning. Welcome to today's symposium. My name is Kirsten Matthews. I'm the Fellow in Science and Technology Policy at the Baker Institute. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. This is actually our first in-person event for the program. We haven't been together in 2 years, so we're really excited to be here today. We're excited to welcome all of you, those people who are here in person, as well as those joining us online on Zoom. Today's event is Developing the Next Generation of Civic Scientists. It's a collaboration between the Baker Institute Science and Technology Policy Program and 2 student groups, the Rice Science Policy Network and the Baker Institute Student Forum. The event really is part of what we do at the Science and Technology Policy Program, our Civic Scientist Program, which aims to increase engagement of scientists and engineers with society to increase knowledge as well as interest in science. The term civic scientist was penned by Dr. Neil Lane, who's in our audience right there, one of our panelists this morning. He'll be here, while he was the director of the National Science Foundation. A civic scientist is someone who uses his or her scientific knowledge, accomplishments, and skills to bridge the gap between science and society. Today's event celebrates several civic scientists, including Dr. Lane, as well as provides an opportunity to develop our next generation of civic scientists. Several of them I see in the room here today. As our nation and the world wrestles with the new phase of the pandemic and the imminent need to curtail the effects of climate change, science and our understanding of science has become more vital as well as challenged. Only through engagement, listening, learning, and collaborating with the public can we move forward. Today's event would not have been possible, though, without our sponsorship for the Civic Scientist Program, and I would like to thank Winifred and Benjamin Chang, as well as sponsorship from the Weiss School of Natural Sciences and the Brown School of Engineering at Rice. In addition, I would also like to thank all of the Baker Institute staff, including Daniel Morali, Flora Naylor, and Laura Holtz, who organized today's event, as well as members of the Rice Science Policy Network and the Baker Institute Student Forum. To start our day and moderating our morning sessions is the president of the Rice Science Policy Network. He's also a Baker Institute Developing Civic Scientist Leader intern and a Rice graduate student in bioengineering, Adam Navarra. Adam and his colleagues developed the Rice Science Policy Network in the summer of 2020 in the middle of a pandemic to bring together Rice graduate and undergraduate students interested in science policy. As an intern in the Developing Civic Scientist Leaders program, he also helped raise awareness with our state policymakers and our federal policymakers of the importance of funding basic science research. In addition, he was an inaugural Texas Science Policy Fellow, where he worked with an immunization nonprofit, the Immunization Partnership, to promote vaccine policy to Texas legislators during the 2021 legislative session. Adam did this all while continuing to conduct research with Dr. Tony Mikos in his lab at Rice University, which is quite impressive, I would say. This involves developing bioinks to do 3D printing of bone and tissue cartilage, something he could speak of way better than I can, so I won't. So would you please join me in welcoming Adam to the stage?
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. Good morning. Whew. After months of planning, it's very nice to see everyone here finally. My name is Adam Navarra, and as Dr. Matthews mentioned, I am a PhD student in the Department of Bioengineering here at Rice, as well as the primary student leader of the Rice Science Policy Network. Rice SciPol is a student group here at Rice centered around discussing science policy issues, developing members for future careers in policy, and advocating for science-backed policies in our community here in Houston. For those of you who may be hearing of us for the first time through this event, I'd like to take just a few minutes to introduce some of our work and our goals that we have both for our organization and for this symposium. Rice SciPol was started in the summer of 2020 by a group of students who had attended a science policy seminar course within the Baker Institute. Dr. Kirsten Matthews and Dr. Kenny Evans were kind enough to serve as our faculty sponsors as a student group here at Rice, and we registered as a chapter for the National Science Policy Network. During these first years, spent almost entirely on Zoom, Rice-SciPol members have pursued their personal passion projects. For example, Catherine Brink and Shubham Tripathi wrote an opinion piece calling for the protection of the immigration status of international graduate students, which was published in Houston's largest newspaper, the Houston Chronicle. This then further developed into a published white paper where they provided a more in-depth analysis on the importance of immigration policies in the STEM workplace. Jordan Metz, who you'll meet later today, helped organize and moderate a series of lectures within the Baker Institute that covered discussions on climate change, science communication, and policy within the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I myself worked on providing up-to-date COVID infographics featuring local data to provide members of our Houston community with locally relevant information during the constantly evolving COVID situation. And finally, Melody Tan, who is one of the primary driving forces behind Rice-SciPol's formation, developed a pilot program for a statewide science policy fellowship. She spearheaded a collaborative effort between the Rice Colleges of Natural Science and Engineering, the Baker Institute, the Academy of Medicine, Engineering, and Science of Texas, or TAMIST, and the Immunization Partnership, an advocacy organization that advocates for science-backed vaccination policies in Texas. The inaugural fellows of this program, which was named the Texas Science Policy Fellowship, worked closely with the Immunization Partnership to prepare policy memos and infographics for distribution to state legislators to provide them with scientific information regarding the bills that they were voting on. This fellowship culminated in a trip to the Capitol in Austin to attend hearings and speak with legislative offices, as well as a policy brief assessing the equitability of the COVID vaccine rollout in Texas that was published in collaboration with the Baker Institute. This fellowship in particular is something that we would be interested in expanding to other institutions here in Texas. And so if this sounds like something you'd like to help support and organize and you are in another institution here in Texas, certainly feel free to track me down today or reach out to me afterwards. In addition, if you are a student at Rice and are interested in becoming a member of Rice-SciPol, our doors are always open. Please track me down or reach out to me, and I can make sure you end up on our mailing lists to keep up to date on meetings and events. We're very excited to host a wonderful slate of speakers today. There will be a Google form available for you to submit questions for each speaker during our moderated Q&A sessions. For those of you attending in person today, you can access that form via a QR code on your table. And for those of you on Zoom, there should be a link available. In addition, we have dedicated time at the end of our symposium today for organized discussion groups, in which you can meet and discuss specific topics of interest with other attendees. We're doing this because we would love to provide the opportunity for collaborations to arise and for a coalition of passionate students and scientists to grow and advocate for positive change in Houston, Texas, or for our more distant attendees over Zoom on a national level. So with that, I hope for a chance to meet and speak with many of you today, and especially this afternoon during our discussions. We have a number of sponsors we'd like to thank, which also includes funding from the Student Activities Partnership Fund and the Rice Graduate Student Association. In addition, the Baker Institute Student Forum assisted greatly with helping advertise this event on campus, and so I'd like to introduce their president to say a few words about their organization. Andrew Wan is a senior at Rice University studying political science and cognitive science. He is the current president of the Baker Institute Student Forum, for which he has been involved with since his freshman year. Please welcome Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Adam, for that introduction, and thanks for having me for some quick remarks about today's event. On behalf of the Baker Institute Student Forum, welcome to the Rice Science Policy Symposium. When Adam and Jordan first reached out to us about co-sponsoring this event, we were thrilled, not only because it was such a great opportunity to promote science policy and civic responsibility, but also because they had done so much work in planning already and that we barely had to do any of the work. So we just had to really advertise this event for them. So on behalf of Baker Institute Student Forum, props to the Science Policy Network for putting on such a great event today. Thanks to them, we have some fantastic speakers and opportunities for learning and networking today. And we are especially happy that undergraduates have also been included in today's event. To give some quick background on what the Baker Institute Student Forum does, we were founded in 2002 to provide a link between the Baker Institute and the student body. We are an undergraduate organization focused on promoting public policy among students, and this year we have invited speakers and panel discussions on a variety of topics, such as the Afghanistan withdrawal, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and vaccine equity, in order to educate and foster discussion within the student body. But the Baker Institute Student Forum has also always been interested in engaging undergraduates in policy, not only as a general interest area, but also as a profession. And while the Student Forum has hosted some career-oriented events in this past year, including an internship fair here around like 2 weeks ago, I think, none of these events have been as large or as in-depth as today's policy symposium. To that end, today's event is a terrific opportunity to explore the intersection of science and public policy through lectures from prominent civic scientists, and we hope that everyone here, from early professionals to graduate students to some undergrads here today, find something useful or inspiring here today. And now I'll welcome back Adam to introduce our first speaker.
All right. So our first speaker today is Dr. Adriana Bankston. After earning her PhD in biochemistry, cell, and developmental biology from Emory University, Dr. Bankston served in a number of public policy leadership positions for organizations such as the Future of Research, the National Postdoctoral Association, and the American Society for Cell Biology. She was a policy and advocacy fellow at the Society for Neuroscience before accepting her current position as a principal legislative analyst for the University of California Office of Governmental Relations. In addition to her work with the University of California, Dr. Bankston is involved with a number of organizations that empower early career scientists, including Advancing Research Impact in Society, the STEM Advocacy Institute, and not least of which as the Chief Executive Officer of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. With an impressive record of science, advocacy, and mentorship, I'm thrilled to introduce to you today Dr. Adriana Bankston.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. Let me pull up the slides. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today to talk to you about how students and early career researchers can engage with science policy. As was said in the introduction, I'm a legislative analyst at the University of California Federal Government Relations, and also the CEO for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And I've listed our Twitter handles here. Feel free to tweet with my handle, all SciPol Journal as well. So just before I start, I have to say that this is my personal views and not my employer's. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of basics about science policy and how we define national science policy according to the book Beyond Sputnik. National science policy is defined as the set of federal rules, regulations, methods, practices, guidelines under which scientific research is conducted. And there are two fundamental concepts: science for policy, which means that scientific findings are used as a basis for developing public policy, and policy for science, where government laws, regulations, and policies affect the practice of science, and this is it's focused on these regulations. So these are just concepts to keep in mind as we'll go through the presentation and with background. So when thinking about this as an early career scientist, why might want to engage in policymaking? So it provides exposure to a variety of ways of thinking and also expanded understanding of the world. Allows you to think about how to push your ideas forward effectively to your intended audience. And as I've seen in my role at UC and before, it really gives you an ability to address a set of problems that you really care about and make a difference on those issues, which is why this career path is so exciting. And you can really think about making a bigger picture impact on a larger scale than you would if you were working at the bench. And not the least of which, engaging the community and the public, as well as policymakers, which is important for scientists to do, especially in pandemic times, but very relevant to today's workshop as well. So where can you do science policy? There are a number of settings. Obviously, I'm at a university, so that's one kind of option. These positions will differ based on the type of work you do. Some are more research-based, so think tanks and universities, as well as professional societies, nonprofits, and again, some of them can lobby, so probably the ones on the left side here. And others don't, but they provide the background information that is used often by advocates to work on these issues on the Hill and advocate for specific issues and try to push different positions forward. So obviously that happens on Capitol Hill. Again, biotech is another option. And then you'll have funding agencies and federal and state governments, which design some of these policies on the back end. So depending on what you're interested in, there are a number of settings for this. And again, there are also options in terms of what you want to do sort of day to day. So I wanted to show a few job titles that I often show to students. When you go on job searches, it can be overwhelming if you see all these different titles. So roughly can be broken down by research and reporting on policy, which is usually an analyst position. If you like communicating about and promoting science, you might look at jobs like public affairs officer, for example. For programs, again, health program specialist is a position that is often seen in government roles. And higher level sort of public service, again, you could be a policy advisor, or you can work on the Hill in the personal office or in committee. And these also differ based on, as I said, sort of more research-based roles versus more people-oriented sort of lobbying on the Hill sort of roles. So most of these I would say are probably in between. You kind of do a little bit of everything, but good guidelines to look at if you're looking for positions. And again, I often, get this question from students: what should I think about? What skills should I develop if I'm interested in policy? So what I would say is, as a scientist, you already have subject matter expertise, which policymakers look for. And you also understand how the scientific process works, have done data analysis, which comes in handy in a research position in policy. And you also have critical thinking and project management skills, which again are important day to day in these positions. And what I would say to think about developing, obviously communicating with non-scientists, which is different from your colleagues in the lab, analyzing your audience, and also building consensus. So obviously this is very common in terms of if you're trying to advocate for a position at the Hill, there will be a number of stakeholders involved that will sort of try to push specific position that they'll have to agree on. And obviously audience analysis is critical to being able to really hone this message to who you want it to go to. And lastly, networking and professional relationships. Obviously, these are key to advancing in a policy career, and it's something that can really help you move forward and really learn about what different individuals are doing in their policy positions as well. So another question I get often: how do I learn about science policy? What should I read? Where is this information? It's really everywhere. So I would encourage you to engage in discussions on social media, for example, your local science policy chapters, which a lot of universities have. I will say that writing, and we'll go into a little bit of this, but writing is a big part of the job, obviously, all these policy positions. It's really important. If you can write something that is not academic, like op-eds and blog posts, as you're sort of in transition, if you're thinking about policy careers, it's helpful to do writing kind of that's not academic, sort of outside your comfort zone, to get used to this kind of writing. Informational interviews are great for getting to know people and what they're working on. I'm always happy to talk to students sort of one-on-one, talk about my career path, and help guide them as well. And a lot of people who have transitioned are happy to do that as well. So definitely reach out to folks to learn about what they do day to day. If you want to get more in depth into this, you can call your representative, as they like to hear from constituents. And you can also join science policy groups or apply for fellowships if you really want to make the transition into the field, and that's a good way to do that. And I'll touch upon a little bit of my experience as well. And the last sort of background question, how do you set yourself apart? This is, I think science policy is becoming a popular field for scientists who want to do this, and I think that's good. But also it's sort of, it's a crowded space. You kind of have to set yourself apart, build a niche, and sort of get people to know you and what you're interested in. So again, when I get questions from students about how do I do this, I usually say that finding an issue that you're really passionate about and let people know that. Tweet about it, write a blog post, get on a podcast, talk about your issues of interest, and people will start to notice and hopefully invite you to different things to talk about those issues if you sort of become an expert in them. So you're sort of starting from scratch, but it's a good way to get people to know you and looking for ways to gain experience. And we'll talk a little bit about this. And really showing your excitement and commitment to the issue. If you find something that you're really interested in, you can really build your portfolio around a number of different activities to show that you're really interested in the topic. So I wanted to now spend a few minutes to go over my career trajectory, which is highlighted in the introduction, because I think it provides some good examples in terms of the kinds of things you can look at and think about that's more tangible. So I got my bachelor's in biological sciences from Clemson, my PhD from Emory. I was a postdoc at U of L, really was set on an academic career. During the postdoc, I started thinking more about other options. U of L actually didn't have a lot of resources for postdocs, so I started this craft seminar, which brings speakers to talk about careers. You can see two of the images here. We had a couple of policy talks and really starting to learn more about this. But a good way to do this is to get involved at your university in these kinds of programs, either attend the sessions or create some sort of program. It's a good way to learn how to do this and will help you meet people. The other side is I joined a postdoc committee, which again had sort of talked about postdoc policies and institutions, how we can support them. And it was interesting to see how universities function from a policy standpoint. And then the other two things I would say kind of strategically, one is cultivating a national level interest, as was already mentioned, with the National Postdoc Association, the Graduate Career Consortium. So in my interest, given that they were around training, I looked for national organizations that were training students and postdocs and learning how that's done to see if that's something I might want to do. Really was helpful to grow the network that way. And then engaged also locally a little bit in policy through the Kentucky Academy of Science. So we actually created an award for societal change that is still there and rewards researchers who do sort of public engagement. So that's kind of one strategy and good starting point to do something locally at your institution, in your state, and also look at what organizations are working on issues of interest nationally. So in my, again, perspective, sort of I was at the institution, I became interested in how universities can support the next generation in terms of career options and also for science policy careers as I transitioned myself to this field. And that experience really made me become interested in advocacy for students and early career researchers in universities, and again, looking for groups that were working on these issues. So as was already mentioned, Future of Research is a nonprofit that advocates for early career scientists. I was involved with them for a number of years in leadership roles and organizing some events to hear early career perspectives and collecting data from universities to publish and try to push for policy changes that would support trainees in universities. And so this is one example of the kinds of projects we worked on. So we looked at how institutions would comply with the Fair Labor Standards Act, which you may remember, this was in 2016, mandating that universities increase postdoc salaries. So if you made under a certain amount, they would be increased across the board. And so we did this study to look at how institutions across the country would comply with that. Then we also still remain interested in this topic, and so we tracked postdoc salaries from institutions. You can see the image on the right, and published this from a number of universities where the salaries vary based on titles, and this became a good research project, but also was the first time that I really saw the connection between federal policy and universities and how we might be able to support trainees from a policy perspective and what that looks like at the federal level. So this was really kind of the start. As was mentioned, I did a fellowship with Society for Neuroscience. This fellowship was really instrumental in the transition in that I helped plan the Capitol Hill Day. I attended briefings, learned how things work on the Hill, and learn how to read legislation and the budget, read the budget numbers that were interesting for specific research areas, including neuroscience, and a lot of writing. Again, I'll emphasize this again. So one thing is I wrote the congressional testimony, which is what the SFN president would use to testify in Congress. Contributed to Advocacy Network newsletter. This is a newsletter that goes, I think, every month to SFN members and summarizes all federal issues of interest to the society. And contributed to judging applications for the Early Career Policy Ambassador. So this is a training program they have. I think they accept maybe 10 students every year who come to the Hill Day and do advocacy during the year. So this was, again, a good blend of kind of advocacy, policy and training all in one, and really liked my time there. So this is a good way to transition and learn how things are done. And I also wanted to share a few other things. As again, Adam mentioned in the intro, I have been involved in a number of positions, and kind of the strategy here, I guess, is that since I was already involved with the National Postdoc Association and starting to be interested in policy, I joined their advocacy committee, their writing team, again, learn how to write policy. ASCB was my society where I presented research from as a grad student, as a postdoc, and again, joined their public policy committee. So another tip here, your society probably has a policy committee or science communication or opportunities to get involved. So definitely look for that. Continuing with my interest in graduate education, I was co-chair of their committee for NSPN for a year, and then locally, and then more recently, leading the education task force for the Women in Government Relations, which is, again, now being in this field, trying to understand how things work and trying to network and meet folks who are in this field. So that's like a tip, again, kind of where you want to go and see who's in that space. Locally, I was involved until recently with the SFN DC chapter. So once I left the fellowship, still wanted to be involved with the society. Local engagement, again, is a good way to do events and meet people who are sort of closer to your interests and be able to do local events with them. But again, the same sort of thing here, local, national engagement kind of at the same time, not all the same time, but overlapping to build different skill sets and work with different groups of interest around sort of training, graduate education, and again, have a common thread throughout all of these experiences. So leading to today, so in my current job, we advocate for University of California system with Congress, administration, and federal agencies. So again, very fitting for someone who has come from the bench. I really enjoy being on the policy side and kind of liaising between researchers and policymakers. And we also perform legislative analysis and engage in advocacy for policy topics that impact universities. We also meet with program directors from different agencies to learn about grant opportunities that UC researchers can apply to or may be competitive for. And we plan and execute a number of events. Obviously, they've been virtual as of late, but Capitol Hill visits and briefings where UC researchers can present their work. And again, you can sort of see the similarity here. A lot of this I had already started doing in the fellowship. So again, good way to gain access to this, but these things are quite common, I think, in these positions. So I wanted to show just 2 examples of impact, what I think I've been able to accomplish here. If you're thinking, okay, I'm doing all this training, what can I actually achieve in policy once I'm in this role? So one thing I'm really proud of, this briefing that we organized with grad students and postdocs in the UC system. They talked about pandemic impacts on their research, and we had Hill staff attend, and the stories really resonated with them. And so we are now including students more actively in our advocacy days, which is really nice to see. Unfortunate that they had to sort of speak on this, that they're impacted by the pandemic, but it actually became a good strategy for advocacy. And it's always, of course, given my interest, it's great to see their voices being highlighted on the Hill and with staff. The other thing, I wrote this amendment, which writing bills in itself is a skill set to learn. But essentially, this is for the NSF for the Future Act, which you may have seen. It's been circulating for about a year. This article is from last June. But the language included professional development funding for postdocs. First of all, they didn't have postdocs in that section of the bill that relates to training, so we added that in. And in addition, we added this section about funding for professional development. And so this will hopefully move forward. So if this passes, it'll become a law, which is exciting. So this is the sort of thing that I think even getting your language in the bill is quite challenging, and was a great accomplishment to see that happening. So just wanted to highlight this to kind of point out that this is a way of making impact in the field. There's a lot of questions about what does it mean to make an impact in policy, but if you're working on legislation, this is the sort of thing that you might be able to do and really advance something substantial. So in the last section, I'll switch now again to tell you about the journal. So again, and emphasizing this again, because the journal is a great way to obviously learn how to write and edit articles and publish. It's been a good sort of stepping stone for students who want to go into the field. And I think it's really valuable what the experiences that you can gain in publishing here. So I want to just give a little background on what we do and what we offer, and hopefully pique your interest in JSPG. So we are an international open access and peer-reviewed journal, and also a nonprofit. JSPG was established 10 years ago by leaders in the field, and it's really a unique platform for them to publish, or for early career authors to publish policy work from a number of topics. We, in addition to publishing, we also serve as a vehicle to elevate the published articles and the ideas from a number of policy areas. And we really try to be more than just a journal, in that we want to be a place where authors can engage, discuss their ideas. We organize a number of events, and trying to link more what they're publishing to the policymaking process and help them engage in the process at different levels of government. And then, so we serve as an independent, free and open source forum for debate and discourse in policy. We publish in a variety of formats, which you can see here, from shorter papers like memos and op-eds to longer papers like policy positions and other articles. As I said, we cover every corner of science and technology policy. You can see some of the topics here, and then you can see more on our website as well, but it's quite broad on purpose, so we can publish a number of topics here. But I did want to share a few calls for submissions that we have currently, which is really exciting, and a lot of opportunities for publishing and learning about policy. So one, which we just launched yesterday actually, is on youth involvement in digital health with the Lancet and Financial Times Commission on Governing Health Futures. This is a really novel idea. This report came out at the end of last year, and really looking to engage youth in the future of digital health. The second one is an open science policy, which is sponsored by UNESCO and the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. We're also working with the Global Young Academy Open Science Working Group. Again, open science is a big topic globally. UNESCO released the first sort of definition of open science at the end of last year, and it's a global discussion. Again, we're trying to engage trainees in this conversation. We just had a webinar today, and more events around this to give them some insights into what's being discussed, but also help them write papers on this topic. And the third is on science diplomacy. This is something new for us, but is sponsored by the University College London, and we have a number of outreach partners who are doing sort of global work in diplomacy. This has been a great set of events so far. The deadline is coming up, so still time to submit. Again, diplomacy is also a growing discussion in the field, and really excited to be able to hopefully bring the new voices to this topic and see what they submit to the issue. And the last one is a standard issue with the AAIS, Science Technology Policy Fellowship Program. So we worked with them for the past couple of years. Because this is not a topical issue, the standard issues are sort of broad. You can submit on any topic. So instead, we're doing career events, career webinars. We will do a writing workshop to think about policy writing, as well as a number of events also in the coming months. So all these calls for papers, we organize a number of trainings leading up to the submission deadline, and then we try to also highlight publications once they're published. So I'll share some of our channels with the organizers if you'd like to pass it on. But we have a number of different events sort of leading up to the submission deadline. So these include, as I said, webinars and workshops, which you can see online. We also partnered last year with UC Irvine's GPS STEM to create this virtual science policy and advocacy certificate program, which we'll hopefully offer again this year. And it's another way to learn policy in terms of writing and elevator pitching and so on. Another resource is the editorial board. Again, this comes back to how to engage. This is an early career board where, again, we have trainees submitting, and they really are part of shaping what's going into the journal. They have a way to provide input into submissions that we accept, and they're able to read policy and edit policy in a number of topics. So another good opportunity for professional development. Our current application cycle just closed, but we'll have it again in the summer in July. So we encourage you to apply for that as well. And the last sort of part of this is, as I said, once we publish, we don't want to just be, have articles online and nothing happens to them. So how do we engage or get these ideas sort of out into the public? So a few things, we try to get the authors to present the papers to different partners or conferences. So you can see here, we had authors presenting, so presenting to the British Embassy through a special issue on climate solutions that was sponsored by the UK Science and Innovation Network. And so that's what they did here. They presented to the embassy online, which is exciting. We also try to submit conference panels based on the published articles. So we've had a number of these different conferences. We have a podcast where we interview authors. It's another incentive to give them another way to speak on what they published. And we are working on media engagement. So for example, here is an article from Northwestern highlighting students who published in the journal in 2021, but we're also looking for other avenues to highlight what they published again and really engage the media, which is a work in progress. So that's really all I had to say. So I wanted to share all of our links here. I'm happy to send this around as well, and all of our call for submissions that we have at the moment. I'm happy to chat more about the journal or any career questions that you have. This is my contact. Feel free to reach out. Again, also by email if you'd like to talk more about policy. Always happy to talk to trainees. And thank you again for listening.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Bankston, for that really informative presentation. So we're going to have a short Q&A with Dr. Bankston here today. And as a reminder, you can find the access to submit your questions via the QR code at your table or the link in the Zoom. So our first question, Dr. Bankston, comes from our audience. It asks, so you emphasize the importance of writing in your talk, and we're wondering, could you speak about how the process of writing may differ between preparing a research manuscript versus preparing a policy manuscript for the journal?
Yeah, so I would say most policy writing is very sort of high level. So you're starting, you sort of flip the argument from sort of introduction background to really putting the main point first, and then you kind of unpack the argument from there. JSPG itself is a little bit more academic in a sense because we are a journal and we have scholarly work that is obviously evidence-based and referenced, and the peer review does make it a little bit more academic, I suppose. So the format is more in that way because we're trying to teach students how to sort of formulate this argument for the journal, and again, that becomes a good tool for their career to use on having this paper. I think in policy, other than through JSPG, again, things are much more concise and short. You kind of, again, put the bottom line first. So I've given a lot of presentations about this, how that's different from the academic writing. And to sort of extend this to what I kind of do day to day, there tends to be a lot of collaboration in science policy in terms of writing and drafts. If you're coming up with, say, a position on climate change, that sort of document goes through a lot of approvals and different edits. And then, we'll eventually go to the Hill, but it's that whole process of what I was sort of alluding to, this consensus building, collaboration, and pushing a position forward is a lot of that sort of in the back end of any document you're working on in policy. So that may or may not be the same in academia. Policy tends to be a very sort of, common ground sort of work where you, again, are pushing a position, but it's probably the work of 20 people on the back end. And then you say, okay, our university endorses this, or so on and so forth. But it's a very collaborative process. So that's also something to get used to, is kind of going through that process when you're putting out a policy statement on the Hill, for example.
Thank you. And so there's probably more than a few students in the audience today who would be interested in perhaps writing a piece for the journal. Do you have any advice for how they could get started?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'll share our links here to some of the things I mentioned. I would recommend attending some of the events that we're putting together prior to the submission deadline. So we'll have a couple of writing workshops for a specific topic. So it's really very hands-on, sort of learning. We'll have a speaker talk about how to write a paper. We'll have breakout rooms where they can practice. And now it's sort of evolved into this organic system where people who actually come to the workshop want to submit a paper together. So it seems to be working interestingly. But that's a good way to learn and sort of, come and learn about writing and actually practice. The webinars that we have now organized for each of our issues provide really the content knowledge on that. So as I mentioned, the open science today. So we really try to have high-level experts talking about the latest issues on the topic to provide that content knowledge in addition to the practice in the writing workshop. So this is becoming sort of the routine for all of the issues. So that's what I would recommend. Attend the events. We've also done events with prior authors where they spoke on panels, as I mentioned, and then we recorded those. So I can also share that, and I would suggest subscribing to the YouTube channel where all those recordings are. And again, you can hear from prior authors about their experience and what they've gone through, what it's like to publish here, how the editing process has gone. And then, as I mentioned, also the editorial board. Applying for that is another way to actually learn how to do this in another way if you want to get some experience with editing.
I guess to conclude today, we'd like to ask, in your experience, both as a scientist transitioning into the policy space, and then mentoring many other young students and early career scientists, what do you consider to be one of the most important traits, skills, attributes for young scientists who want to be involved in policy to gain or to learn?
So I would say probably being flexible and open-minded. I think sometimes in these jobs, things sort of come up, which is exciting, but I think it could be frustrating for a scientist who's used to kind of planning their week. And I was that person, sort of planned my whole week in the lab and knew exactly what I was going to do every minute. These jobs aren't like that. So it's sort of, you, especially in federal policy, I feel like we have sort of projects and priorities. You have to be flexible. For example, when a campus has a question, then you kind of, shift to that. When something happens in the administration that would affect QC negatively or so, we may have to stop and then pivot to that and send the response to the Hill or that sort of thing. So it's very much, in a sense, responsive to what's happening federally, which can be stressful, but I think it's exciting because you're really in real time responding to things and can have an impact, as I showed you today, in the legislation that's moving. And, for someone like me who's still relatively early in government relations, to be able to write an amendment, it's a pretty big deal. So I like that it's sort of, there's a lot of variety. Sometimes you don't know what your day is going to bring and you just adapt. That's something you learn on the job. The other thing I would say is being able to, realizing that you are kind of a newbie in the field. So when I came here, I have a PhD in biochemistry. No one really cares about that. It doesn't matter as much, other than I can read science and liaise with scientists, and that's part of, a good way for someone like me to be in a position like this. But at the same time, I had to learn a lot of basics about, how to write these different memos and things that I need to do for my job day to day. As I mentioned, how you read legislation to find out different, funding numbers. And so in a way, you are very much starting from scratch when you're moving into policy, because there's a lot of terminology and, again, different ways of writing and doing things that you weren't used to at the bench. So just being comfortable with that and realizing that, you're kind of starting over. But as I said, it is a great career path where you can really make an impact.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again for the invitation, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.